One night in Korea, there was a man named Bae Jin-soo who was going to end his life by jumping into the river. He did that because he was in a lot of debt since he became a victim of investment fraud. Just a moment before committing suicide, he suddenly received a message from an unknown number saying that he would be given a lot of money if he followed the sender's request. From there, he was picked up by a luxury car. When he reached the destination, he received an offer to participate in a game called the Money Game. After reading all the rules, he concluded that the game was not dangerous. He became even more interested because the prize money from this game would pile up the longer he survived. Considering the prize, he participated in the game. He was told to choose a number as a sign of his participation. He then entered a large area that contained an 8-story building. Using his card, he got a room on floor number 3, indicating that the card number represented the floor where the players' rooms were. He changed his clothes into a uniform made for the game and then read the game rulebook, which was available in his room. He found out that players were prohibited from leaving their rooms at curfew. By looking at the scoreboard installed in his room, he found that the participation prize he earned increased by tens of thousands of won every 1 minute. He began to imagine how much money he could get. When he tried to order necessities with his prize money, he was shocked to find the price of the goods he was going to buy was 100 times more expensive than the price originally. From here, he concluded that the game was created to test how far the participants could save. In the end, he only bought a bottle for urinating and a newspaper for his bed. The next day, Jin-soo was finally able to get out of his room and get to know the other 7 players who came from different floors. From this introduction, he knew that the number on each participant's uniform symbolizes the floor they came from. After that, all participants discussed the rules of the game. They also experimented by buying items outside the room to find out whether the price was as expensive as buying them inside the room. From this experiment, they found out that the price of items purchased outside the room was the same as the original price, meaning they could save a lot of money if they purchased items outside the room. However, after further investigation, it turned out that purchasing items outside the room did not use the prize money, but instead the time they had already spent at the game. They discovered this after checking the game time, which was reduced after making some purchases. They also found out that the game time was reduced proportionally to the price of the goods they bought, or in other words, the more expensive the goods, the more time was reduced. The lack of information also made the participants unaware of what would happen when the game time ran out, and to prevent things from happening, they agreed to buy necessities at very cheap prices. Shortly after, the players began wondering where the foods that were previously promised to be provided free of charge. Amid the confusion, the 8-4 player suddenly admitted that she had received 12 portions of food and drinks sent via a special channel in her room. Moreover, she also revealed that she had devoured them all. Her statement immediately sparked conflict because no other participants had received food or drink yet. To prevent a bigger commotion, the 8-4 player was willing to share the food and drinks in the next delivery. After finding out that food and drinks were only sent for the 8-4 room, other participants started to think about how to share, considering they were prohibited from bringing items out of their respective rooms, and if they violated the rules, their prize money would be deducted greatly. To find an idea, everyone went to check the 8-4 player's room to find out whether the delivery channel in that room was connected to the delivery channel in the other rooms. As soon as they arrived they were shocked to see the spacious room in contrast to the other rooms on the floors below, which were narrower. A sense of injustice immediately emerged when they found out that the players on the 8th floor also earned a much higher prize per minute than the other participants. So the level of the floor reflected the prize and the quality of the room. With a game system like this, it meant that the 8th floor player was the one who benefited the most, and conversely, the one from the lowest level suffered the most. Back before the 8th floor player took part in the game, it was revealed that she chose her number at random, so she didn't expect to get the biggest prize among all the players. Because of her extravagant and consumptive lifestyle, she liked to buy expensive things in her room and wasn't afraid of running out of money because her prize money was very high. When the food for all the players was delivered to her room, she casually tasted each box of rice and used the water from the 12 bottles to bathe. All the players finally revealed their prize money. The 7th floor player, who was the smartest, concluded that the prize from top to bottom had a pattern inspired by a mathematical formula. After that, the players then visited each room to check the prize each room got. From this visit, it was revealed that the 8th floor player's wage was worth 340,000 won. The 7th floor player's wage was 210,000 won. The 6th floor player's wage was worth 130,000 won. The 5th floor player's wage was worth 80,000 won. The 4th floor player's wage was worth 50,000 won. The 3rd floor player's wage was worth 30,000 won. The wage of the 2nd floor was worth 20,000 won, and the player's wage on the 1st floor was worth 10,000 won. The players then also find that as they went down to the bottom level, the room became narrower and the quality also decreased. After finding out the difference in wage value and room quality, some players expressed regret for not choosing card number 8, but the first floor players said that they should be grateful because they still had bigger prize money and a better room than him, though he actually felt lucky to get the lowest level room since he didn't have to struggle to climb the stairs. After that, the 7th floor player made rules for distributing food to create fairness for all players. According to this rule, each player could only take one portion of the food, while the remaining 4 boxes could only be distributed to players who felt starved. The 7th floor player had a chat with Jin-Soo, who was the 3rd floor player. With his sharp analytical skills, the 7th floor player concluded that this game required cooperation and solidarity. Therefore, he made rules for distributing food in such a way so that the players could get along and be united. The next day, the 8th floor player caused a commotion because she bought expensive items outside the room. As a result, the game time was reduced drastically and only 15 minutes were left. Her reckless action was flooded with negative comments. The 8th floor players then revealed that they could increase the game time by running up the stairs, and even though the others didn't believe it at first, they still followed that advice, only to find that it was right after all. The 8th floor player was able to figure out this method after she observed the game time increasing every time someone climbed the stairs. Since finding a way to increase the game time, all players prefer to use game time rather than their prize money for making purchases. So that this new strategy could last in the long term, the 7th floor player made a new policy by making running upstairs a daily job. He then divided the 8 players into 2 groups, each of which had a schedule of 1 day of work and 1 day of rest. To create a sense of fairness, the 7th floor player also set a rule that the group that worked that day would get 2 meals a day, while the group on rest day could only eat once a day. One day, Jin-Soo felt lazy because running up the stairs repeatedly was very tiring, but in the end he was able to get his spirit back because from the start, he wanted to get a prize from this game to pay off his debt. After that, the 1st floor player showed that he was unable to run up the stairs because he had difficulty walking. The strong girl from the 2nd floor finally decided to replace him because she couldn't bear to see him being scolded by the 6th floor player. When Jin-Soo saw the 2nd floor player was tired from doing double work, he decided to replace her as a form of concern. As time went by, the 1st floor player felt guilty because he couldn't do anything to help his group. To make up for his shortcomings, he allowed all players to use his room as a place to dispose of their waste. The 1st floor player finally found his role as an environmental cleaner. Slowly but surely, the situation became more stable because each participant had found their respective roles to make a positive contribution, until one day, the players found that the increase of game time became less and less even though they had increased the intensity of their work. During work that day, the 4th floor player experienced epilepsy due to work fatigue. The 5th floor player, who had been a health worker, told everyone about the medicine that could overcome the symptoms of epilepsy. This information led to a big fight because some players wanted to buy the medicine with less than 30 minutes remaining in the game, while other players prohibited this purchase because they were worried that time would run out and cause unexpected danger to them. Amid this chaos, Jin-Soo managed to buy the medicine, but strangely, the game time actually increased a lot until it reached 40 hours. That was when the 7th floor player realized that the game time could increase not because they ran up the stairs, but because they provided a very exciting spectacle in front of the cameras installed in every corner of the game location. Back before the 7th floor player joined the game, he was shown to be very classy, indicating a possibility that he was a highly educated person. It's only natural that he was a thorough person and took every decision with full consideration. After the fight was over and the 4th floor player had recovered from epilepsy, the players realized that they had to make a spectacle that entertained the audience to get extra money. Not long after that, the 7th floor player met Jin-Soo in secret to invite him to ally secretly because he saw something special in Jin-Soo. Though he felt that he had nothing special, Jin-Soo finally accepted the 7th floor player's invitation because he felt like working together would be able to help him in many ways. The next day, all the players gathered to discuss the performance they needed to create to increase game time. At the end of this discussion, they agreed to hold a talent show as content to increase game time. Long story short, this talent event started with the appearance of the 7th floor player. He showed his talent in uniquely playing the flute so that the audience was very entertained and made the game time increase by more than 20 hours. Before the next player's show started, the 7th floor player invited everyone to discuss their next move. All the players agreed to play the game and take home their prize money when they reached their respective targets. With his ability to calculate the income and expenses, the 4th floor player concluded that they should be able to survive in this game for about 2 months to meet their targets. After that, the additional game time obtained from the performance of the 7th floor player was used to buy equipment for the other players' performance. Then, when the talent shows continued, the second and sixth floor players competed by showing their great physical strength. In this competition, the second floor player proved that she was stronger than the sixth floor player. The fifth floor player then showed her talent in singing pop songs, followed by the fourth floor player who showed off her talent in singing yodel songs. The event then continued until finally Jinsu got his turn, but because he didn't have any talent, he decided to do a random dance that made him look ridiculous. After that, the first floor player managed to amaze everyone because he turned out to be good at pantomime. Entering the eighth floor player's turn, she hinted that her talent was doing sex. Seeing the body language of the sixth floor player, she then asked him to have sex in her room. As soon as the immoral moment was over, the eighth floor player succeeded in getting the most additional game time, namely 69 hours, so she became the first place in the talent show. With game time reaching around 155 hours, the players then discussed the next content to extend the game time even further. After all, time is very important to carry out their mission to survive for the next 2 months. In the middle of this discussion, the first floor player complained about the smell of his room because it had been a place to dispose of waste bags of all players. He finally asked for the disposal location to be replaced. As a form of concern, the majority of players agreed to hold a vote to determine which player's room would be used as a dump. Before voting time, the fourth floor player tried to influence the Jinsu, the first and seventh floor players, to choose the eighth floor player's room as a dumping place because she had the largest area and the highest salary, so she would be able to bear the heavy burden. At the same time, the player on the sixth floor managed to convince the players on the eighth floor and the players on the second floor to choose Jinsu's room because he hated Jinsu since he did his ridiculous dance at the talent show that he considered an insult to the art of dance. The day of voting was finally held. Jinsu and the eighth floor player had the potential to be chosen because their votes were equal. In the end, Jinsu was very happy because the eighth floor player's room was chosen as the dumping place. Strangely, even though her room was chosen, the eighth floor player showed a reaction as if he was not burdened with it. On the other hand, the players did not expect that the voting somehow increased the game time after the spectators thought that their voting was worth watching. There was this one important moment that occurred before the voting took place. It turned out that one of the players who chose Jinsu was a player on the seventh floor, and he made that decision after being influenced by the sixth floor player. He then kept this a secret to maintain his good relationship with Jinsu. On the other hand, the second floor player decided to betray the sixth floor player by not choosing Jinsu. Instead, she secretly followed the first floor player's decision to choose the eighth floor player because she sympathized with the condition of the man. Sometimes later, the eighth floor player reneged on the agreement by not accepting the voting results. She stopped distributing the food and drink she usually gave to everyone. Back before the fourth floor player joined the game, it was revealed that she was a wishy-washy nature. She once chose a number 8 card before finally deciding to choose card number 4. She was also not good at making decisions. Back to the main timeline, 7 players, including Jinsu, were experiencing hunger and thirst because they hadn't had the food or drink that was usually distributed by the 8th floor player for days. Gradually, all the players who were suffering started to realize that this happened because the 8th floor player was angry with the voting results. This situation was further aggravated by the attitude of the 8th floor player who locked herself in her room and refused to communicate. Jinsu then thought that if he couldn't survive in this game, then he would lose his only way to pay his debt. Moreover, he couldn't let himself and the 6 other players continue to experience a crisis that threatened their lives. With that in mind, Jinsu finally sacrificed himself to replace the 8th floor player's role so that she would change her mind. Feeling responsible for the anger of the 8th floor players, the 4th floor player also wanted to do the same thing. The 7th floor player finally conveyed their wish to the 8th floor player as an apology. The 8th floor player then accepted this apology if the other 7 players were willing to buy her clothes using the game time. Since this incident, the 7th floor player insisted the players must comply with the 8th floor player's wishes so they would not experience a crisis again. After that, Jinsu began carrying out his duties as the cleaner. He initially felt disgusted because over time he couldn't stand the smell of his room, but because he remembered his debt, he finally could face this situation with grace. Sometimes later, the 7 players accepted the idea of the 8th floor player holding a game as content to increase game time. In this game, the participant who took the ball with the letter K was free to give orders to the 2 participants who took the ball with their target number on it. In the first round of the game, the 5th floor player got the K ball and ordered the 6th and 7th floor players to hold hands. Then in the second round, it was the 4th floor player's turn to become king, and she ordered the 5th floor player to kiss the 1st floor player. Entering the third round, the 8th floor player finally got the king's ball, because the 2 previous orders only gave a little extra playing time. She decided to give a quite dangerous order, namely pitting the second and sixth floor players against each other in hand-to-hand combat, which would only stop if one of them surrendered. During this duel, the second floor player was able to almost beat the sixth floor player because she had mastered martial arts. But as soon as the second floor player's hand was injured, the sixth floor player was immediately able to turn things around until finally, he managed to beat her face black and blue. For the safety of the second floor player, the fight was finally forced to stop even though she hadn't given up. After the battle, the game time was increased by 50 hours, meaning that the audience was very entertained by the duel, so that there would be no more victims of violence. All the participants finally agreed to the idea of the fourth floor player giving stun punishment to participants who refused the king's order. The punishment was chosen by the fourth floor player because according to her, the stun gun she chose would not endanger their life. As the condition of the second floor players had improved, the king game finally resumed. In this round, the eighth floor player was the king again. She ordered Jin Su to touch the private part of the fifth floor player. Didn't want to accept that immoral order, Jin Su finally refused the order and chose to get zapped. As soon as his body was zapped, he immediately fell unconscious and wet himself. After waking up, he felt very embarrassed. To avoid the same incident, he promised to carry out any order if his number was chosen by the king. In the next round, the fourth floor player became the king and ordered the second and sixth floor players to guess the image of the coin she would throw. The second floor player made a wrong guess, so she had to obey the orders of the fourth floor player to serve the punishment. The second floor also experienced the same embarrassing situation as Jin Su, and that made the other players realize that the stun device was used to make the target faint while wetting themselves. After that, the first floor player told Jin Su that there was manipulation of the results in the coin-tossing game. It turned out that the perpetrator of the cheating was the fourth floor player who secretly arranged the coin, so that she could trap the player she chose. Not long after that, the seventh floor player also told Jin Su and the others that he managed to catch the fourth floor player red-handed when she was arranging the draw balls, so that she and the eighth floor player had a higher chance of becoming a king. Thanks to pressure from the seventh floor player, the fourth floor player decided to stop cheating because she was afraid that her doing would be known by everyone. From here, the king game could finally run fairly without any manipulation. In the next round, the first floor player became king and ordered the seventh and eighth floor players to play a coin-tossing game where the fourth floor player served as the coin tosser. The eighth floor player would finally be zapped because she made the wrong guess. On the other hand, Jin Su was very impatient to see her being electrocuted because he considered this punishment to be very appropriate for a heartless person like her. When the seventh floor player was about to electrocute the eighth floor player, the sixth floor player suddenly intervened and managed to paralyze the seventh floor player with his attack. He then electrocuted the seventh floor player because he believed that his action would make the audience even more entertained. The seventh floor player then woke up in the eighth floor player's room. Because of him, the eighth floor player's plan was finally discovered, and according to her, the game wasn't fun anymore. The sixth floor player then destroyed all the intercoms in the other rooms, so they couldn't buy anything, especially weapons, to fight back, and the bottom players, which were Jin Su, the first, second, and fifth floor player, had to bow to the top players, which were the fourth, sixth, and eighth floor player. After that, the seventh floor player, who's in the same group as the top player, announced a new game that was only played by the four bottom players. Each time they played, they had to be able to increase the time by 24 hours, where if they failed, they had to continue playing without being given food, and if they refused, then the sixth floor player would shoot them with the stun gun he had. Not only that, the sixth floor player didn't hesitate to torture them until they begged for mercy, and like it or not, the first floor player, the second floor player, Jin Su, and the fifth floor player had to follow what the sixth floor player said. The seventh floor player then explained what game they would play. Each game only had one winner, and the winner would punish the three losing players by hitting their heads. For several days they had been playing the game. Sometimes, even though they had been playing all day, they were still not given their share of food, to the point that Jin Su thought of dying instead, because if he died, then the game would be over. But after thinking about his efforts so far, he didn't want to just die. The next morning, from the instructions of the first floor player, they quietly went to the first floor room through the delivery channel, so they wouldn't get caught, and made a plan to attack the top players. But the seventh floor players secretly told them what they were talking could be heard through the delivery channel. Apparently, even though the seventh floor player was in the top group, he secretly helped the bottom players to carry out a revolution. Second floor players still couldn't believe whether he was on their side or not, because he was the one who made this cruel game, but the only hope they had was to believe in him. The next day, they carried out their plan. The first floor player would scream if his stomach was in pain, so that everyone on the top floor would come downstairs. But the 6th floor player felt something strange, because Jin-Soo and the 2nd floor player didn't come out of their room, which meant they were probably in the 1st floor room. He then asked the 8th floor player to use the gun they had if something happened. When the 6th floor player checked the condition of the 1st floor player, sure enough, the 2nd floor player and Jin-Soo tried to pin him down, but they were not strong enough against him. He then took the gun that was in the hands of the 8th floor player and intended to shoot them, but the 7th floor player signaled Jin-Soo and the 2nd floor player to hit the 6th floor player, because it turned out that the gun had been jammed so it wouldn't work. The 2nd floor player immediately hit the 6th floor player until he fainted. The bottom players managed to tie up the top players, and now things turned around. They also forgave the 7th floor player because he had helped them. Their actions also backed quite a lot of extra time because it seemed like their revolution was welcomed by the audience. All the top players were locked in their respective rooms tied so that they couldn't do anything, and the luxurious 8th floor players' room was made into their base camp, and there they planned to buy things using the 8th floor players' money. The food came, they could finally taste the food without having to wait for the top players to feed them again. They felt like drinking alcohol, so the 5th floor player came up with the idea of making alcohol because she had previously taken an alcohol-making class. She then experimented and succeeded in making one, even though it tasted a little sour. They spent their time chatting until the evening. Different from the upper class who were selfish, the 2nd floor player wanted the game to end even though the 1st floor player hadn't reached his target money. She wanted to stop doing this and get out of the place. She even promised to give some of her money to the 1st floor player because they had suffered enough. Finally, they agreed to spend the remaining 9 hours before they ended the game. That night, they decided to sleep in their respective rooms, but suddenly, the time didn't decrease, but instead increased to even more than 30 hours. They guessed that one of them was making a show, and then they checked one by one their prisoners, but nothing was found. They became suspicious of each other. Someone didn't want this game to end. The next day, game time was increased again, and this time they found out something happened to the 4th floor player. Someone pulled out her teeth on purpose, but they didn't know who. Later, it was also discovered that someone had plucked the 6th floor's toenails. The 2nd floor player was upset because no one was willing to admit it. She even accused the 7th floor player because he had the highest chance of betraying them, but it did not rule out the possibility that she herself could also be the perpetrator. So she made the decision to lock up everyone except herself and the 5th floor player, and from then on, nothing happened anymore while the 5th floor player started drinking alone often that sometimes she became delusional. The next day, the 5th floor player saw the 8th floor player and the 4th floor player coming out of their room and thought that the 2nd floor player had let them go, even though she was just imagining it. She then went into the 6th floor player's room to let him go. There she felt sorry because the 6th floor player pretended to be afraid of the 2nd floor player. She then calmed the 6th floor player. The 6th floor player took the chance when he realized that the 5th floor player was acting strangely. He was sure this woman was experiencing delusions. The 5th floor player woke up feeling happy because everything was back to normal and soon they would be home too. Before going home, they celebrated their success in surviving in this place by eating and drinking together. But in fact, the reality was not as she imagined because they were all being tortured by the top players who took revenge on the revolution. The 6th floor player then bought a gun and several bullets and then threatened them to tell him who had pulled out his toenails, but none of them knew it until he shot the 7th floor player in the leg. Blood gushed out from his leg, but even though he had been shot, he still didn't know who the perpetrator was who had pulled the 6th floor player's toenails. The 6th floor player wanted to shoot the 1st floor player, but then Jin-Soo realized the only way for them all to find out who the perpetrator was, namely by buying a video of the incident. The 8th floor player became excited. She and the 6th floor player then bought the video and watched it in her room, and it was revealed that the perpetrator was the 1st floor player who from the start had a grudge against the 6th floor player for beating him up. He didn't want to leave the place before getting his target prize, but when the 6th floor player wanted to kill the 1st floor player, the 8th floor player suddenly stopped him by shooting him with a stun gun. Everyone was forced to obey the 8th floor player. This time it was not power or strength that won, but money. The 8th floor player had a lot of money, but she was not satisfied with the show, so she, with the 4th floor player and the 5th floor player, locked all the other players in their respective rooms and then watched their sufferings through the video she bought. Their suffering was a stimulating fetish for her. She then got an even crazier idea, namely sleep torture. She wouldn't let them all sleep and her eyes would remain open. The torture was so terrible that it made Jin-Soo lose consciousness to the point that he fantasized that all the players were dancing in front of him. His mind was disturbed because he hadn't slept for a long time, but for the 8th floor player, this was the torture that they had to accept. Their sufferings created a burning turmoil in her. She even painted to channel her emotions, while the 4-4 player could only pretend to like all the actions carried out by the E4 player when in fact she was annoyed to see her. She expressed this to the first 4 player when she gave him food. She obeyed everything that the E4 player did because she needed money. She also understood the actions of the first 4 player who pulled out her teeth because of anger. According to her, in this place, she didn't need to be human. She just needed to be a good player and come out with the prize money. The first floor then apologized for his actions, and he also revealed that they could actually change rooms. That was when it was revealed that the reason the first 4 player wanted to achieve his target, which was 1,000,000,000. When he entered the game, he realized that he had made the wrong choice by choosing number 1 instead of number 8. Then he asked the intercom if he could change his room, and it turned out the fee was quite expensive, namely 1,000,000,000. With that money, he could be able to change rooms to the room on the 8th floor. Back before joining the game, the first 4 player was a street magician who was looking for money for his daughter's treatment. He had to earn a lot of money for his little daughter. After failing to find such a large amount of money, he intended to commit suicide so that his death insurance could pay for his daughter's treatment. But when he wanted to do that, he got a message about the game. He then asked the 4th floor player to work together to overthrow the cruel 8th floor player. The 4th floor player invited everyone who was being tortured to join her. While she fed or cleaned up the players who were being tortured, she would tell what the 8th floor player was doing and when should they ambush her. Unfortunately, the 8th floor player always had a gun in her pocket, and she also practiced shooting. She even once said that she wanted to shoot a real person and see the sensation of fresh blood pouring out of a gunshot wound. Meanwhile, the 5th floor player was still experiencing her delusions so severe that she couldn't even do anything. The 4th floor player tried to get closer and talk heart-to-heart with her. She said that they had to help the first 4 player to change rooms and replied to what the 8th floor player had done to them. After talking with the 4th floor player, the 5th floor player was moved. She was willing to help on one condition, namely she wanted to castrate the 6th floor player after what he had done to her. The ambush began when the 4th floor player tricked the 8th floor player while accompanying her to play golf. Then the 5th floor player released all the prisoners from the tie. She then helped them rest their stiff bodies because they had been sitting in the same position for days and hadn't got any sleep. Unfortunately, the 8th floor player's pet dog saw something strange and kept barking. This made the 8th floor player realize something was wrong. The 8th floor player finally found out that the 5th floor player had released all the prisoners. She almost shot the 5th floor player if not because of the 4th floor player who hit her on the head until she fainted. Somehow, after they were released from the torture, it began shedding tears. They were so happy that the day they were finally freed finally came. The only thing they had to do was to change rooms. Before that, the 5th floor player asked for the conditions she asked for. It turned out that she had bought complete surgical equipment, and then she castrated the 6th floor player. After her revenge was avenged, they then fulfilled the first 4 players' wish to change rooms. He bought the conditions for changing rooms for 1,000,000,000, but what came was not a room key or anything but a letter that stated that all players could move rooms, and the room price was stated on the letter. What he just bought was not a key room, but rather a letter or prices for each room whose value was unreasonable, and his 1,000,000,000 was wasted. They were all being played. There was no reason to stay any longer. The 2nd floor player promised to share her money with the 1st floor player as long as they left this place, but the 1st floor player didn't accept it because he was the only one who lost a lot of money. He threatened them all with a gun. Meanwhile, from a distance, the 8th floor player just laughed at the show the 1st floor did. From this incident, there was a big addition to the game time. The 1st floor player then bought circus equipment and began doing a circus show in front of everyone. All his senses were gone, just like his 1,000,000,000. He then showed the main show where he made a slack line and did some kind of balancing act. He showed that he could walk on a tightrope without safety, which actually made the audience worried, afraid that he would fall and get hurt. But he didn't care anymore. He even jumped repeatedly as if he were on a trampoline until he reached the top light and finally fell to the flames. Jin-Soo tried to free himself from the rope to save the 1st floor player, followed by the 7th floor player, while the 2nd floor player tried to contact the intercom and ask for help, but their efforts only increased the time. It seemed like they wouldn't be able to get out and would forever be trapped inside the game. Jin-Soo suddenly took the gun and shot it at all the cameras. The 2nd floor player also broke the cameras that she could reach so that the audience couldn't see what they were doing in there. With the damaged cameras, the time suddenly turned to 0, which meant that the game was over. But unfortunately, the 1st floor player had to die after the accident, leaving his daughter who still needed him. He regretted being selfish and shouldn't have been greedy. The exit opened and there was a letter saying that the game was over. The money they earned would immediately be deposited into their respective accounts. After that, They all went to their respective life. Jin-Soo stayed on the bed all day because what happened in the game had made him tired. The money he earned was cut in half because he had destroyed the camera. All he had to do was gather all the players. There was only one way to gather them. He made a notice board on the street billboard that he was going to hold a funeral for the first floor player. He did this because after tracing the family of the first floor player, they didn't know that he had died. His family only knew that the man had gone abroad and left a lot of money. The 7th floor player was in charge of giving the money to the first floor player's family, while the 6th floor player only left a bouquet of flowers. They also got news that the E4 player, whose name turned out to be Song Sarah, was an art artist. She destroyed an art gallery and paid for all the losses with her money, then ended up in prison. After the funeral, everyone left without asking about each other. They didn't even ask where they lived or their news. They only encouraged each other. They didn't want to know who put on the money game. They just didn't want to remember everything that happened there. They all realized that no matter how hard they tried to live a better life, everything was pointless because the world only puts money above everything.